Good morning everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Crisis Comms, Lessons from Greater Manchester Police. My name is Jake O'Neill, I work at Vuelio and I'm delighted to welcome you all today to this very special webinar. Before we start, just a few social cues. If you'd like to join the conversation, you can use the hashtag Vuelio. You can find us on Twitter at Vuelio or Facebook Vuelio, or on LinkedIn, email, and I've been told not to mention Google+. Delighted to be joined today by a very special guest, Amanda Coleman, who is the Head of Corporate Communications at Greater Manchester Police. Amanda, welcome.
Well, morning.
Morning. So the format of this webinar is very much going to be Amanda presenting on crisis comms using her own experiences and lessons for the wider community. So Amanda, I think without further ado, take it away.
Morning, everybody. Well, I mean, it's such a huge area. So what I'm going to try and do over the next sort of 20 minutes or so is give some key elements to think about so you can go away and hopefully assess your position, look at where you are, look at where you need to be, and hopefully there will be items in this that you will that will be practically useful as we go forward. Because for me, it's such an important area. This is something that is a once in a career potentially thing that happens, no matter what it is, whether it's at the high end of emergency side of things and critical side, or it's a reputational issue, whatever. It doesn't matter where on the spectrum it is, on what the business is you're working in. This is such an important area, and you have to be ready for it. So I'll try and go through what I think are the kind of key elements to take away, and I think there's time for questions at the end. So hopefully if there's anything you need clarifying, I'll cover that at the end. The first thing is, clearly everybody talks about having a plan, and it is really important. You do need a crisis plan, something that everybody's aware of, that's ready to go, that you can pull off the shelf at a moment's notice. It might be something you rarely use, but you need to understand it. And also within that, you need to understand the roles and responsibilities. Who's going to do what? If you're in a very small team, then you might need to go outside of the business to get extra support. And it's about having that there and ready and really quickly mobilised to provide you with that support. If you're in a bigger team, or if you've got different people within the business, within the organisation who you can call in, then it's about having those roles and responsibilities outlined so that they know what they're doing, they know that they could be called in to help. And again, for me, in your plan, it's not about having very high-level strategy, approach, that kind of thing. You want to cover some elements of that. Most importantly, who is doing what and how will it work in that initial, half an hour, 2 hours, that 24 hours. And then I'll talk in a bit about the more important bit as well, which is about taking it forward. Because crisis comms never is just something that comes and goes within 24 hours. It's not the way it works. These are things that will be with organisations, businesses, whatever the areas you're working in, for quite a period of time. So we're talking of, a year, 2 years. Some organisations are still living with crises that have happened many, many years ago. So you need to be kind of seeing that far ahead with some of it. But on the bottom line, when you're ready to go, is having the roles and responsibilities. And it stops the confusion, because you just haven't got time to brief people on what they need to do when something has hit, and it is that speed and the speed of response. But also you need it to all work together. So it can't be a plan that just looks at the media or social media as being the priority. It's got to look at everything. It's got to be a real holistic, integrated approach, because that clarity and consistency on and offline is crucial. We know from personal experience, and we'll talk about probably what happened on the 22nd of May last year, that the most important thing for us, as well as the speed of response, preserving and protecting life, it's about having a really clear and consistent message that goes to everybody, so there is no confusion. And again, whatever you say on social media, whatever you say in the media, whatever you're saying to staff, the common narrative, the thread, the key messages have to all be there and aligned, so there isn't anything to choose between, and you get that real clarity of position. And as I said, messages. messaging approaches. So, you will understand your business, you will understand how it operates. How will that work in a crisis when that crisis hits? Who are the key people? What is the approach that you are? What's your USP for the business? Because that needs to shine through, and that will define how you approach the communication aspects. And you might want to have some messaging that's already outlined, because we can't have massive layers of authorizations and approvals when you're dealing with crisis comms, because it will delay you, and we know that delay breeds problems, because in the public's mind, whether it's a delay that's in social media, delay that's on the media, delay in terms of getting some information out to people that are affected, that causes you problems in the long term. So being able to operate quite quickly is critical. So that bit might be something to look at. You need scenarios for that, obviously, to do some scenario testing to look at what are the most likely things that are going to hit your area of business. For everybody, it's probably, everybody's got one of a cyber attack, because that's just so prevalent now as a possibility. But then, have a look at where the risk factors, what are the most likely things that are going to hit you, whether it's a financial implication of something, it's a loss of reputation linked to something else. You can probably identify some of the most likely. You're never going to be able to look at everything. We can't have plans for every conceivable eventuality for communicating about what might hit the business. So common threads, common areas, common approaches, and then being able to move those and manoeuvre them between different things. And then the other thing, which I would say, is exercising and testing. If you've got your plan, you've got your procedures, you've got your approach, you've got your policy, if you've got any policies in relation to the business, exercising and testing them regularly is really important. But not just on your own. So it's about involving those other stakeholders. Who's got an investment in the business? If you're in a public sector, you will probably have other public sector colleagues. If you're in a business area, there will be other key stakeholders in that business that you will need to identify. So you need to know who they are. You need to know that they understand what approach you will take when you're in this situation, and that you can discuss that and you can discuss a way ahead. So for us, in Greater Manchester, one of the key elements is we have a very strong link between our public sector comms heads and groups. So we meet on a monthly basis anyway. They understood ahead of the arena. We'd already talked about in a terrorist attack what the approach would be, what we would do, how we would operate as the police, how we would then keep them in the loop, how we keep them informed. Don't get me wrong, we've done lots of debriefs on what happened, and there's always areas for improvement. But I think all the work we've done in the months before the 22nd of May last year had massively helped, because people understood how they were all going to work in that sort of situation. There's always ways we can develop that, and there's always other stakeholders that you haven't perhaps thought through, but you can still highlight the most important ones and identify how that you can bring them on board with what your approach is going to be. So yeah, exercising and testing regularly, make sure that those roles and responsibilities are understood, and look at what others are doing. Review kind of what your thinking is around when a crisis hits and when you need to make a response. Look at how other organisations and other businesses operate, even if they're massively outside of what your area of expertise, your area of business is. There's always stuff you can learn, always stuff you can learn. And clearly, obviously, you're interested because you've logged onto this today. So, for me, keep learning, keep looking at what you can do. So just try and move the slide on. There we go. Speed. So I talked about speed before. When we had the arena attack last year, the speed of getting the message out, it's really problematic now, because people are operating on social networks, people are getting information out so much quicker that we have little time to be able to respond, and we have to get out as quickly as possible. I've said a number of times, we were aware, we got contacted it was 10:30 at night, so we got contacted on-call press office. That was about 10 minutes after we got the first reports in. We had the first tweet out within 20 minutes. It might sound like a long time, and it probably felt like a long time, but it was the quickest we could get it out. It was still speedy. There's still areas where we could try and slim that down, but it worked quite well, because we were able to put out a message that said we're aware that something's going on and we are dealing with it, and more updates will follow. So it was just a line in the sand to give people a a feeling that they knew somebody was aware of it, they knew that we were controlled, there was a bit of confidence around it, recognising that an issue's there. So you might, as we said, clarity and consistency, message, you might not be able to say a lot, but the key bit there is around saying enough so that people know that you are in control, the business is aware, the business is looking at it, and that you'll follow it up, and then being able to keep the messages flowing really quickly, whether that's in certainly the first hour, the first 2 hours. Within all this, first message for us was about preserving and protecting life, so that was where we were focused on. So look at what is the key element for you in that first hour. What is it the most important thing to do? Because the plan's got to adapt, it's got to change. So you'll start to plan for where you are now, but it absolutely needs to be reviewed because the situations and crises develop, new elements come into place, things go awry, things happen. Again, you've got to be flexible in your thinking and flexible in how you approach what happens. Media spokesperson, it's a bit old school, but we still need one, and you've got to have them trained. It's so important, media training, having a number of people that you can call in that organisation. Because when a crisis hits, you want a reassuring voice that is comfortable putting them, being put up at often quite a high level in terms of the media, so they may need to do national or face with international media. They've got to be comfortable. They've got to not worry too much. I mean, they're always going to be worried about being in front of the cameras, but you don't want them to be overly concerned. And again, we go back to the plan, is you need that person to be clearly identified so that they know, so that you've not got to go, well, who's going to speak? I don't know. Who are they going to be? Have one or two. If it's this, we'll go to this person. If it's that, we'll go to the other. Often it's going to be your chief exec, your CEO, your chief constable, whoever it is. That when it is at that level, you would need to use. So have that identified, understand that, and again, all can form part of your plan. And provide opportunities. So again, it's part of the planning. When can you need somebody out visibly speaking about what's happened quite quickly, because again, it's the reassurance, it's the openness, the confidence that it gives to people who may have been caught up in whatever's going on. Even though sometimes if it's an organisational failing, you might face a hard time, but again, if you've media trained them properly, whilst it be challenging, it won't be something that is too much out of their comfort zone. So again, look at providing opportunities. It might be that you need to just provide a visible spokesperson in a statement, and you can't answer questions. We were in that position. So, the incident happened at 10:30, by 3 o'clock in the morning, and we were doing the first press conference. It wasn't really a press conference, it was more like a media statement, because we couldn't answer a lot of questions that the media had at that time. But we still got out there to do it. And it's the same, we did another one by 7 o'clock. Thinking was, the incident happens overnight. We needed people who had gone to bed not knowing what had happened to wake up with as much information as they possibly could have that would reassure them, that would help them to find people if they were unsure where relatives were or where their friends were. So, again, think that through. Think through how you can provide those sort of opportunities, where you would do them. That's another key bit. There's also an element, which I'm not even going to go into, about business continuity, because we had a position where all our emails, internal and external, failed, I think about 36 hours in, unconnected, but again, sometimes these things cause you problems and you might not be able to use your headquarters, the building that you've been used to using, or somewhere. So think through where you might be able to undertake media interviews if you need to. And then fake news. I think it's always going to happen. So I knew when I got contacted about the arena attack, which was sort of 10, 12 minutes after it had happened, my first thing was to look at what had happened, because we didn't know at that point quite what had happened, to look on social media and to put Sky News on. When I went on social media, there was already the fake photographs circulating. So that's the speed that it can get out. And I don't think it was ever a deliberate thing in terms of those fake photographs. Somebody'd obviously found some previous photographs from a training exercise and then thought that was linked. So you need to think through how you will look at that, how will you gather that, and what would you do? We never tackled that fake news because we didn't have time to. And actually we didn't need to, because some of the local media were aware that the photograph wasn't as it appeared, and they stepped in for us. So, it's something we all, in the world we live in now, have to be really, really mindful of. I'm conscious of time, so I am speaking quite quickly, but I'll try and keep going. But that's all fine. We often plan and prepare and exercise and test for the first 24 hours, the first few days. But these things take a huge amount of time. And when you move to recovery, the recovery phase, that could be 2-3 weeks into it. It could be longer. But it has to be at the right time. One of the issues we faced was, from a comms perspective, saying operationally we may be moving towards a recovery phase, but that's not where the public are. That's not where the public's mindset is. And we can't talk publicly about that at this stage. And it's important that you've got the confidence within the organisation to be able to say that, and to be able to give that confidence that you understand what's going on outside of the business, outside of the work. You can get that mood and tone, and you can amplify it back into the decision making that takes place. The other thing is important in terms of dealing with the longer term elements of a crisis is that little things really do matter. Attention to detail. I mean, Manchester City Council worked really well in terms of how they dealt with the flowers that were at that were placed in the city centre, because people were very sensitive to it, and what they did with it could have had a massive reputational impact. If they'd just disposed of them, then it would be hugely problematic, because people would have been very upset that they'd been removed and disposed of in that way. So they spent a lot of time and effort in making sure that they sensitively dealt with it. It's a whole other element of looking at it. But those are, to me, that's where you win or lose the confidence and support, recognising where people are with things and being sensitive to their perspective, to their viewpoints. It's a critical element, really, I think, in terms of how you go forward. And again, keeping connected with what everybody's doing, because you might, from your perspective, feel as though this is your crisis, but you're only one element of the story. You're only one element of what's happening. So you have to be connected into things and connected through. And you need to remember it is another massive topic, and one that I think we're only just with, but the welfare and resilience of the business you're working within, because people are people and will be affected. And that's the same whether you're a member of the emergency services or whether you're a local council employee and you're working in that kind of arena. It will affect you. And for comms people, we hear and get to know a lot of detail about things that wouldn't necessarily become public, and that can affect you. It doesn't matter what it is, but we need to recognise that, and we need to make sure that we're providing welfare support to our comms teams and to any of you on here. If you have to deal with it, you need that support network in place. Really, really important. It'll help get you through and make sure that you don't think because of the amount of difficult things that you're dealing with. Huge amount of resilience is so important. And I say I could talk endlessly about that. And then the key thing, if you take nothing away from what I've said in terms of plans and processes and everything else, it's people. The people have to be at the heart of your comms work and your decision making and what you do, because that's the most important thing. So you've got the people in terms of staff, the people who are working on whatever it is, the people who are affected internally within the organisation on whatever you're dealing with, but also, most importantly, it's people who are affected by the incident, by the issue, by whatever's happening, and then the wider public that will feel the impact as well. If you're making decisions with them in mind and with them at the first point, then you'll make good decisions. You're more likely to make good decisions. If you're not, then your potential to make the difficult, wrong, problematic decisions is massive. And we talk a lot about plans and processes and procedures and policies in relation to crisis, and they are important, and that's where I started. But within all that, people have to feature massively heavily. And we did a lot of work after the debrief of the arena, and have made sure that front and centre of the stuff for us in terms of dealing with a crisis is family support, to those affected, to victims' families, etc., to make sure that we're there supporting family liaison officers, to make sure we can do that. We did it with this, but it was not in our plans at all. It was the right thing to do, and it still is the right thing to do. We've rewritten what we do on the back of that. And then the other thing is remembering place, because, you know, it happened in Manchester, it happened in London, it can happen anywhere. Understanding that geography, understanding how people operate in that area, understanding the psyche of the place. You know, if you live and work there and you know the area really well, that should be straightforward. But it's important to remember that as well. And then coherence, one voice message going forward. Again, you know, we still are doing huge amounts of work across all partner agencies to make sure we still share that and we have the same messages and we understand that. And it was interesting because 6 months after the arena attack, we got something we would never really normally get and do, and that was that we, across the council and the police and the mayor's office, agreed we wouldn't do any media. Because we knew families were in that position, they didn't want to do that, and it worked, and we all held that line. Really important, I say, if you've got that connection between you and other agencies. And then just to wrap up, because I'm conscious we're coming up to the end of the half hour, essentials, policy, process and procedure, really important. We've talked about that, having that in place, understanding the roles, having that in your back pocket, so that it doesn't matter what time of the day, whenever it happens, if it happens, you'll be able to deal with it. Test it and get ready. It's not your story, it's everybody's story. Everybody will have their own element of it. You're just a part of it, and recognise that. Recognise that in your approach with your comms and how you plan, because that's essential to get a right kind of tone to what you're dealing with, and to be able to identify what you might need to respond to, what's happening, and what you might say, actually, you know what, we're not going to respond to that because we understand that's their perception, and we don't need to get into that space. But it's what's important for the organisation, what's important for you, what is at the heart of your business and the organisation you work in, that makes that element the most important in terms of your comms messaging, comms response, whatever that is, whatever business you work in. Coherent, keeping it all together, internal, external stakeholders. Make sure it's comms and engagement. You might be in broadcast mode at the start of some crisis, but you will quickly, hopefully, move to an engagement area so you can gather tone, mood and views and feed that back in. But above all, if nothing else, people. The most important thing, never forget the people. The people who are affected. Bad decisions for me get made when people are managing reputation of a business, and that is their sole purpose. It isn't about what's happening. It isn't about trying to move forward for the people there and deal with it. It's more based around just protecting the reputation of an organisation. That's never a good place. Protecting the reputation of the organisation should come from the actions you do and the response you do, not from, you just saying it. It's got to be doing the best thing for those affected, and most importantly, for those that in the organisation are involved, whether that's the broad organisation or particularly the comms team. So again, please go away and think of, if you were in the middle of that, what welfare support do you have around you and around your teams, as well as within the organisation, to be able to take it forward. I'm conscious it's on 27 minutes, so that is probably me wrapping up for any questions for the last few minutes.
That's fabulous. Amanda, thank you so much. You managed to condense, I think, quite a weighty subject into a short amount of time, and it really feels like there is a lot there, because obviously it's quite a specific organisation, it's quite a specific example we've been using, but actually there's a lot there, I think, for everyone to take away. I'm just wondering, we do have time for a couple of questions, so if anyone wants to submit a question via the Q&A box, please do. But I'm just wondering, when we start, do you think that you can, through this process, you're going to make mistakes? It's inevitable that you're not going to always do everything perfectly. Do you think there are elements where you can make mistakes and it be okay, or do you think there are mistakes where that's it, that's the end of the line, and you've made one mistake too many? Like, at what point does that happen? Are you conscious of that while you're going through this process?
I mean, in terms of from comms or from an organisation, I do think there are some things organisations do as a response that can be just massively critical and problematic. From a comms perspective, I think if your whole approach is focused in the right way, in that it's about those affected, and it's not about protecting the organisation fundamentally as its main element, then absolutely, I think you can say we honestly tried to do this, and this, and it didn't work. We recognise that. Honesty is so important, I think, because being really open and honest as much as you can, and being transparent, I think people will to a point forgive some of that. I think where they won't is when it's fundamental organisational failures, and that becomes more problematic.
And do you ever think obviously a lot of this is pre-planning and making sure you know what your processes are before the crisis hits, but do you ever think there's a crisis that could happen that you can't be prepared for? I can't think of one off the top of my head, but do you think there's something that is so blindside you that you didn't realise?
Yeah. There probably is, and because I haven't thought about it. There are lots of parts. When we had done planning for a terrorist attack, which we had done like all police forces, we had never anticipated it would be in the way it was. We had looked at a lot of the learning from London, but Manchester is a very different place, and some of it didn't work. Some of it didn't work because of the way we work as an organisation. Some of it didn't work because of the geography and various other things. So even when you do think about a response to an incident and what it might be, there will still be elements of that you can't plan for. That's why I say you've got to look at it broadly. You can look at the risk areas, and you can know that a product failure, service failure, whatever might be something that happens. But then you've got to have flexibility to be able to respond to the specifics of that incident.
So like having frameworks in place that you can then adapt.
Yeah, flexibility, really, really critical, and definitely that's on all levels. We found it operationally as well as within the comms side.
Yeah, excellent. We've got a question here from Chris. Did you manage the comms all in-house, or did you use an external agency too? We did it all in-house to a point. Well, we have mutual aid within police comms. My failing that I cite quite a lot and I talk often about is that as soon as things happened on that Monday night, I should have already been thinking about calling for mutual aid from some of the police force comms teams. I didn't. It was a bit late, and that left us in a difficult position. So I had staff working 12-hour shifts for a long period of time, doing very, very difficult jobs, often very draining and emotional jobs. And I should have had that support in place quicker. We've done some work nationally on that, so there is some work in place that will mean it will get quicker for forces who are getting that position to get that comms support quite quickly. But from my perspective, it was around the team. I have the wider team that work in comms, and they're not all kind of media or social media or whatever specialists. They all knew their roles, so they all knew what they were doing. So it's about, like I said at the start, having the knowledge around your team, but also there may be people within the organisation you can call on, or then obviously having external help. We've got questions flooding in now. We've got one here from Marissa. She says, how do you manage direct engagement from people via social media during a crisis? Or do you manage their expectations that it's impossible while an incident is ongoing?
Yeah, in the short term, that's why I say in the short term, you're very much in a broadcast kind of position. So we on the night, there was myself in, the on-call press officer. We had another press officer that came in, and the digital member of the digital team. So we recognised early on we wanted to have somebody who could be in that digital space for us, but very much was still in broadcast. We moved towards engagement as the initial pressure kind of subsided. But that was probably a good 12 to 24 hours into the incident. But like you say, it's about managing the expectations. The media understood that was the way we were going to operate because we'd had discussions with them before. And what we did was made people on social media aware. And they were pretty forgiving, to be fair, because people understand what you're dealing with because they can see it. I think some of the challenge comes when you've got a crisis of some description that isn't perhaps as visible, and you're trying to manage those expectations. But, it's about being honest again about what you're facing and how you will move to that point when you can.
Excellent. I think we've probably got time just for one more question. We will try and follow up everyone's questions on the blog, on the video blog afterwards, just because there are so many coming in. But this final question, what did you find more effective in terms of reaching the public? Was it your own channels or the traditional media? And I suppose this is not just at the point of the crisis hitting, but like you say, with the recovery process, like what's more effective for you guys to continue telling that right story?
Yeah, I think it's both at different times, if that makes sense. So in the initial aftermath, the traditional media was heavily important because it was such a severity, it was such a level, there was such media interest. It was kind of everywhere. So for us, getting the right message to that was really, really important because, that was what was playing out heavily, and that was what a lot of people were accessing via social media, with the media channels updates as well. So, but as we've moved forward and as time's gone on, it's been a lot more around not just our channels, but the channels of all the other agencies that are involved in the recovery element. So, so continuing to have that message and have the consistency across the different agencies, that's been what I think has worked more as we've moved forward. But yeah, so probably, and both are important, but at different points, the weighting perhaps changes.
Excellent. That's all we've got time for. But Amanda, thank you so much. And there's people coming in on the questions.
No problem.
Thank you so much. It was truly insightful, and yeah, I think lessons for everyone, no matter what level of comms they're working in. So Amanda, thank you so much from everyone on the webinar.
Thank you.
And everyone, thank you very much for joining us. We will be following this up on the video blog, so look forward to that, and we'll send out a recording and the slides following this early next week. But for now, it's goodbye from us.